One of the most important financial questions that you'll ever need to answer is how much house can you afford? And if you've been following my previous broadcasts and live shows, and if you've been reading my blogs, you'll see that I'm firmly in favour of two things. One, that you buy a house, and two, that you don't pay off the mortgage. And those things have been talked about elsewhere. But tonight I just want to talk about how much house you can afford. That's probably one of the biggest financial questions that you'll ever answer. And what triggered that was this diagram I came across on a website. And basically what this diagram says is that of your income, let's say you earn $100,000 per year, you'll pay about 30% of that is the red section in taxes, and then you'll spend about 40% of that on your mortgage payments, and then at least 30% for your living expenses. Now, I don't know what you feel about that, but to me, 30% going to Uncle Sam, 40% going to my house, and only leaving 30% to spend on everything else in my life doesn't sound quite right. Interesting enough, of course, that this diagram was produced by none other than a realtor. And I'm sure the realtor was trying to do the right thing and give some good guidelines. But what the realtor is essentially saying is that you can afford to spend $40,000 a year of your $100,000 gross salary on a mortgage. And $40,000 a year on the mortgage will probably buy you, let me think, what will that buy you? That will probably buy you about $700,000 or so worth of house. And I would say for someone on $100,000 a year, that's probably way too much. But coming from a realtor, you would expect that. Interesting enough, though, it's not that much more than what the typical homespun advice would give you and what a bank will lend you. A bank will typically allow you to spend up to a third or more of your gross income on a mortgage. Maybe now, after the housing crisis of 2007, 2008 and late 2006, the banks may have changed a bit, but I assure you within a year or two they'll come straight back to that rule again. Because why? Realtors are in the business of selling you houses, and banks are in the business of selling you mortgages, and they don't care how badly you live, provided you don't default on your loans, which is a problem they're having today. But time is short, people will forget very quickly. So what's the sort of advice that I would give? Well, I've got two rules for you, and the two rules that I have are based, number one, on your net worth, which is how much you own less how much you owe, and the second part is based upon your income or your earning potential based upon your net income after taxes. Because let's face it, Uncle Sam takes his slice off the top. The only thing Uncle Sam doesn't take his slice off now is your 401k, but he takes a very big chunk of that later on when you come to cash it out, and don't forget that. So the two rules that I want to give you right now are what I call the 20% equity rule, or I call it the 20% rule, but it's basically a rule of equity on the house. And the second rule is what I call the 25% income rule. And the two rules work together pretty much to tell you what you can afford by way of a mortgage. Because if you think about it, you normally put a deposit into a house when you buy it, and over time you build up equity in the house, and it makes sense to compare that to your entire net worth, which is a picture of what you own less what you owe at any point in time. The second thing is, of course, you've got money coming in the door every day or every week. It's every week or every month, I guess. And it would be good to know what you can afford by way of the mortgage. So what I'm basically saying is that these two rules together tell you how much maximum equity you should have in your house and how much mortgage you should have. Put the two pieces together should give you a fairly clear idea of how much house you can afford. However, the problem is this, that if you're just starting out, these rules won't help you because you'll be able to afford nothing except for a doghouse if you apply these rules. So I'm suggesting that for your first house, that you buy the house that you think you can afford, and then you build into these rules before you buy a bigger house or renovate the house or put any more money in the house down the track. So you may not be able to meet these rules to buy your first house, but I think that's okay because in the long run, that's probably the only way that you'll get ahead and get financially free. But once you do have a house, these rules will stop you from buying too much house. How does it work? Let me give you an example. Let's say that you're on $100,000 gross per year, which is a very good salary these days, but family income, maybe there's two jobs, or you and your partner, one's working part-time, one's working full-time, but let's say you're earning $100,000 gross per year. And let's say Uncle Sam takes between 25% and 30%, 35%, let's call it 30% of your $100,000. That may or may not be quite correct. But let's say he takes 30%, that leaves you $70,000 to spend. Let's also say that you've saved up in your current equity in your house and in the other assets that you own, that your net worth is $100,000. That means that everything that you own added together, less all the mortgages and loans that you have and credit card debt and car debt, means that you have a net balance of $100,000 net worth. So how might these rules work? Well, first of all, take your $100,000 net worth. The 20% rule says that you shouldn't have more than 20% of your net worth tied up in your property at any one time. So 20% of $100,000 is $20,000. Now $20,000 won't even buy you a deposit on a $100,000 house these days, or maybe a $150,000 house, because the banks will definitely demand that you have at least 15% plus closing costs. So you're likely to fail with only $100,000 net worth buying any sort of house. You fail the rule straight away, which is why I suggest that you don't apply this rule to buying your first house. By the way, we're promoting Gatorade today. Okay. But over time, your net worth will build up and your equity will build up. And this is one great rule that will tell you when it's okay for you to start thinking about buying a bigger house. Because let's say you build up your net worth to $500,000. Now all of a sudden you have as much as $100,000 equity built up in your house, and then you can think about buying a bigger one. You can have less equity than that, but certainly no more than $100,000. Okay, now the second rule kicks in. So far we can afford to spend $20,000 on a house by way of equity. Now how much mortgage can we spend? Well, now we've got to again look at our gross income. So our gross income was $100,000. Take off that $30,000 tax to Uncle Sam, leaves us $70,000. So the 25% rule of net income says that you can afford to spend 1/4 of $70,000, which is a half of $35,000, which is exactly $17,500 on a mortgage per year. Now $17,500 on a mortgage per year is around about, let me look at my slide rule here, it's around about $1,458 per month, which if you plug that into an online mortgage calculator, and there are plenty of those, will very quickly tell you through with a bit of trial and error that a $250,000 mortgage at the current low interest rates will just about cover a payment of $1,458 per month. In other words, what I'm saying is you can afford a $250,000 mortgage and you can afford $20,000 of equity, which basically buys you a house of $270,000. That's how the formula works. Again, you'll realize, as I said before, $20,000 won't get you the deposit on the $270,000 house. So this rule won't allow you to buy a bigger house until you build up your net worth. But that's the purpose of these two rules, to make sure that you don't own too much house, which means you've got as much money as possible put aside for investing rather than having it all tied up in your house. And secondly, it stops you from taking too much mortgage. So what do you do if you're already on your first house and you think of upgrading, but you fail one or both of these rules? Nothing. You stay in your current house until you can afford to buy the bigger house fitting within these rules, or doing the renovations or whatever else that you need to spend.